You've been there. Your phone lights up less, the conversations grow shorter, and suddenly the guy who once couldn't stop talking to you has gone quiet. And in that silence, your mind starts running wild. Is he pulling away? Did I say something wrong? Is he losing interest? Or worse, was he never that into me in the first place? But before you spiral, let's stop and look at something deeper. A man's silence isn't just the absence of words. It's a signal, and learning how to interpret that signal could save you from chasing shadows or internalizing pain that was never about you to begin with. Because when a man goes quiet, it's not always rejection. Sometimes it's confusion. Sometimes it's emotional immaturity. And sometimes it's a reflection of how he processes pressure, connection, or even his own desire. If you've ever felt thrown off by a guy's sudden silence, today we're decoding exactly what's going on beneath the surface so you can protect your peace, reclaim your power, and never mistake silence for truth again. When a man goes quiet, one of the first and most overlooked truths is that he's overwhelmed by his own emotional bandwidth. It might seem personal, but often it has more to do with him than with anything you said or did. Many men aren't socialized to explore their feelings in depth, much less articulate them. So when emotional intimacy builds, it can feel unfamiliar, even unsafe. Silence then becomes a retreat, not necessarily from you, but from the vulnerability your connection stirs in him. In this silence, he's trying to regain control of something internal that feels like it's slipping through his fingers. This is especially true in the early stages of dating, when everything is still being evaluated by both people. You're trying to figure out if he's emotionally available, and he's quietly trying to determine if he can be. What women often mistake for indifference is often a storm brewing inside his mind. His silence can signal that he's battling the fear of going too deep, too fast, or worse, the fear of not being enough. He may like you deeply, and that intensity might terrify him if he's unsure whether he can maintain or deserve the kind of relationship he senses you want. Another layer to this is how men often experience pressure to be emotionally composed, always having the right answer or knowing what they want. So when confusion or emotional contradiction sets in, such as wanting closeness but fearing it, it creates cognitive dissonance. He won't always vocalize that confusion. Instead, he'll withdraw into silence, not to hurt you, but to protect himself from revealing something he hasn't even figured out yet. It's a kind of emotional self-preservation, not cruelty. This is where your response becomes everything. Most women respond to this silence with anxiety, reaching out more, over-explaining, or questioning their own worth. But his silence is not an invitation for you to chase clarity from someone who hasn't found it himself. It's a moment to pause and reclaim your emotional ground. Instead of panicking, take his silence as information. He is telling you, without words, that he's not ready or not able to give you the certainty or consistency you deserve in this moment. Some women take silence as a puzzle to solve, when in reality it's a line being drawn, one that you get to decide whether or not to cross. The most powerful thing you can do when a man goes quiet is to resist the urge to fill that space with your energy. Let him sit in the discomfort of what he's not saying. Let him feel the absence of your response. That silence isn't just for him, it's also your space to reflect. Ask yourself, do I want to be with someone whose response to pressure or connection is withdrawal? Is this the pattern I want to sign up for? By pulling back your energy, you communicate something vital. I'm not going to audition for a part you're not ready to cast. You subtly say, I'm here, but I won't wait in the wings while you figure out whether or not I'm worth showing up for. This isn't a game, it's emotional self-respect. It's recognizing that silence doesn't always mean he's lost interest, but it does mean something important. He's not in the same place you are emotionally, and it's not your job to pull him there. So the next time a man goes quiet, don't panic, don't send the fourth follow-up text, don't internalize what may have nothing to do with you. Instead, stand in the quiet with dignity. Let your silence speak volumes too, and give yourself the gift of clarity that only stillness can bring. Because sometimes, what's not being said tells you everything you need to know. When a man goes quiet, it's easy to fall into the trap of assuming the worst, that he's no longer interested, that you said something wrong, or that he's already mentally out the door. But one of the most powerful realizations you can have is this: silence is not always a sign of detachment, but often a mechanism for emotional processing. While you may want to talk things through, clarify the relationship, or simply connect, his instinct may be to retreat inward. This isn't about right or wrong communication styles. It's about recognizing that many men process emotions internally, and his silence might mean he's overwhelmed, conflicted, or struggling to put thoughts into words. In these moments, women often feel like the silence is an emotional wall designed to keep them out, when in reality it might be his way of protecting both himself and you from the emotional confusion he doesn't yet know how to explain. You might interpret his withdrawal as a personal rejection, when for him, it's a form of regrouping. That doesn't mean you should tolerate prolonged ambiguity or accept being left in the dark, but it does mean understanding that a man's silence isn't always rooted in malice. Sometimes it's just emotional immaturity, not knowing how to be vulnerable in a way that creates connection rather than conflict. The key isn't to chase him or try to decode every quiet moment. The key is to turn your attention back to yourself and ask, what do I need right now? You deserve communication. You deserve presence. If he's not offering it, that tells you something without him having to say a word. And while you may be tempted to confront the silence with demands or ultimatums, the stronger move is to sit in your own grounded energy and let him feel the space he's created. That space is powerful. It shows him that you're not dependent on his reassurance. It reminds him that you're not standing by waiting for scraps of connection. Silence can be an emotional vacuum, and when you don't fill it with desperate energy, he has to face the echo of his own inconsistency. If he values you, the silence will begin to feel like loss. If he doesn't, the silence will become confirmation. Either way, you gain clarity. What often surprises people is how powerful emotional detachment can be. Not coldness, but the quiet strength of not clinging to someone who's unsure about you. When you respond to silence not with panic, but with presence. When you stay anchored in your self-worth instead of begging for answers, you change the dynamic entirely. Suddenly, you're no longer trying to win someone over. You're simply observing whether they're capable of showing up for you in the way you deserve. This is not about punishing him or playing games. It's about refusing to overinvest in someone who hasn't shown consistent emotional investment in return. It's about remembering that the person who goes quiet holds no more power than the person who chooses not to chase. In fact, by not chasing, you regain your emotional power. You make it clear, if you need time, take it. But I'm not putting my life on pause, waiting for you to decide. So if he's gone quiet, and you're tempted to bridge the gap, just stop and ask yourself, has he earned your vulnerability? Has he made you feel emotionally safe enough to deserve the benefit of the doubt? Because if the answer is no, your silence isn't a punishment, it's a boundary. One that says, you don't have to talk to me, but I also don't have to stay here waiting while you figure yourself out. And sometimes that boundary is the loudest, most powerful message of all. When he becomes quiet, it's easy to spiral into overthinking. You start analyzing every little thing you said or did, questioning whether you should have sent that last message, whether you laughed too loud, shared too much, cared too soon. That silence becomes a mirror, reflecting back every insecurity you've ever had. But here's what most people don't realize. Silence isn't always about you. Often, it's about his own internal conflict, something he's trying to process, figure out, or avoid. And if he hasn't learned to express those inner battles in a healthy way, he'll let the silence speak for him. But silence doesn't tell the truth. It only tells a version of it. And that version is usually based on assumption, not reality. But what matters most is how you respond to the silence. Most people go straight into performance mode. They try harder, reach out more, become sweeter, sexier, more available, anything to fill the uncomfortable space and win back the connection. But here's the hard truth. If someone is emotionally withdrawing and you respond by emotionally chasing, you set a dangerous precedent. You train the dynamic to say, when you pull away, I come closer. That doesn't build respect. That builds imbalance. That builds emotional dependency. And that's not love. That's fear wearing a mask. Instead, the real power move is to resist the urge to overpump when he underdirections. If he steps back, you don't step forward. You stay centered. You don't coldly withdraw or play games, but you also don't lose yourself trying to keep something alive that he's not showing up for. Emotional maturity looks like letting people sit in their own silence and being okay not fixing it. It means saying, I'm here if you want to talk, but I won't twist myself into a knot trying to pull words out of you. Sometimes a man goes quiet because he knows something he's not ready to admit, that he's not ready, not capable, or not willing to offer the depth you're asking for. And when he feels your energy, your standards, your self-respect, that can be confronting. It's easier for him to disappear than to say, I'm not on your level. It's easier to say nothing than to explain why he's emotionally unavailable. And the moment you understand that his silence is a reflection of him and not a verdict on you, is the moment you stop taking it personally. Because the woman who learns to sit in silence without self-blame is the woman who becomes unforgettable. She becomes the one he thinks about long after the conversation ends. Not because she begged for his attention, but because she didn't need it to define her worth. She didn't beg for clarity, she created it for herself. She didn't force connection, she gave space and waited to see if he could meet her there. That energy is powerful, that energy is rare. Let him wonder why you didn't chase. Let him feel the quiet strength of your presence, because the more you ground yourself in self-worth during his silence, the louder your value becomes. It's not about punishing or proving, it's about showing up for yourself, not shrinking in fear, and allowing the space between you to reveal what words often cannot. Who's really invested, and who was only halfway there from the beginning. When a man becomes quiet, sometimes it's not because he doesn't care. It's because he's overwhelmed by emotions he doesn't know how to process or communicate. Society doesn't raise men to sit with their feelings, let alone articulate them. Many grow up with the subtle but damaging message that vulnerability is weakness, that expressing sadness or confusion makes them less masculine. So instead of opening up, they shut down. They retreat, not necessarily to punish you, but because emotional discomfort feels like a threat they haven't learned to navigate. And when you're on the receiving end of that silence, it can feel like rejection. But in truth, it's often a man wrestling with emotional chaos and lacking the tools to bring you into that inner world. He might be dealing with anxiety, insecurity, shame, or even guilt, and not have the language for any of it. So rather than stumble through the discomfort of emotional exposure, he escapes into silence. This is why you can have a beautiful connection, spend hours talking, feel chemistry, feel seen, and then suddenly he disappears emotionally, not because it wasn't real, but because what followed touched a part of him that felt too raw, too intense, or too unfamiliar. And instead of leaning in, he pulls away. He doesn't know how to say, I'm scared, or I feel like I'm not enough, or even, I want this too much, and I don't know what to do with that. So he lets the silence carry what he doesn't know how to. Here's the part no one tells you. You can't love someone out of emotional immaturity. You can't teach him how to swim while you're drowning trying to keep the connection alive. His growth is not your responsibility. Your role isn't to decode his silence or fix the wound that created it. Your role is to stand in your clarity and say, I don't need someone who shuts down when it gets real. I need someone who leans in, who communicates even when it's messy, even when it's hard. That's not asking too much. That's asking for what's required in any healthy, emotionally mature relationship. So many women fall into the trap of thinking they need to become the emotional translator, guessing, interpreting, overanalyzing, and trying to manage his experience for him. But that creates a dynamic where you're doing all the emotional labor. That doesn't build connection, it builds imbalance. And imbalance always leads to burnout. Real intimacy isn't built by guessing what someone feels. It's built by both people being willing to step into the discomfort of honest, vulnerable communication. If he doesn't speak, you don't fill the silence with self-blame or fantasies. You fill it with boundaries. You give him space, but you don't pause your life waiting for him to show up. You don't send paragraph after paragraph hoping to pull a response out of him. You show him, through your calm detachment, that you're not here to force connection, you're here to build it together. And if he's not ready to meet you at that level, then his silence becomes your clarity. The woman who understands this doesn't lose sleep wondering why he went quiet. She doesn't lower her value to become more digestible. She walks away from inconsistency with grace, not bitterness. And if he ever grows enough to speak what he couldn't before, he'll remember the strength of the woman who didn't beg for words. He'll remember how she didn't collapse under the weight of his silence. She rose above it. And in doing so, she became unforgettable. When a man goes quiet, it's easy to take it personally. It's tempting to assume it's something you did, something you said, or something you failed to be. But often, the silence has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with the internal war he's fighting, the one he's never told anyone about. There's a part of him that wants connection, that craves closeness, intimacy, and trust. But there's also a part that's terrified of what connection really means. Because when you let someone in, you expose yourself. You risk being seen in all your imperfection. And if you've never felt safe doing that, silence becomes the safer path. For many men, silence isn't apathy, it's armor. It's a survival strategy. It's a way of preserving control in a world that feels emotionally unpredictable. Opening up feels like giving away power. It feels like letting someone else into the very place they've spent years defending. So instead of talking, he withdraws. He buries his feelings deep because that's what he's learned to do. But just because he's quiet doesn't mean he's okay. Just because he's distant doesn't mean he doesn't care. Sometimes he cares so much that the fear of losing control outweighs the desire to show up fully. This is where you have to remember who you are. You're not here to be a therapist. You're not here to chase crumbs of affection hoping they'll lead to something whole. You're not here to decode silences like they're riddles only you can solve. If a man wants to be in your life, he has to bring more than presence. He has to bring clarity. He has to bring effort. He has to bring the willingness to show up when it's uncomfortable, not just when it's convenient. Silence may be his habit, but that doesn't mean you have to accept it as your standard. You deserve someone who speaks love fluently, someone who doesn't leave you to drown in uncertainty while they sort themselves out in silence. You deserve a relationship where communication is the bridge, not the battleground, where you don't feel punished for wanting to understand what's going on inside their head, where silence isn't used as a power play or a way to manipulate emotion, but as a rare pause between two people committed to solving, not avoiding. The biggest mistake women make in this situation is trying to earn the words. Trying harder, being more patient, shrinking their needs so they don't seem too much. But what that does is reinforce a dynamic where silence holds all the power. And it teaches him that he can withdraw without consequence, that you'll still be there waiting, hoping, guessing. That's not strength. That's emotional self-abandonment. Real strength is knowing that your peace isn't negotiable, that your sanity isn't collateral in someone else's emotional confusion. Let him sit in his silence if he chooses. Let him feel the distance he created. Let him wrestle with the emptiness his withdrawal brought. But you keep moving, you keep living, you keep loving yourself out loud. Because the woman who refuses to chase silence is the woman who commands respect. She doesn't beg for words. She doesn't plead for emotional crumbs. She becomes the standard that reminds a man what real connection looks like and what he loses when he stays silent. Sometimes silence isn't about fear, confusion, or even emotional baggage. It's about guilt. When a man goes quiet, it can often be the weight of his own conscience catching up to him. He knows something he hasn't told you. He knows he pulled away when you needed him most. Or maybe he knows he broke a part of the trust that once made you feel safe with him. And rather than owning it, he retreats. Not because he doesn't care, but because facing you would mean facing himself. And he may not be ready for that. Guilt is a funny thing. It's silent, yet deafening. It builds up like static behind his calm exterior, making it impossible for him to fully engage with you because he's holding on to something he hasn't had the courage to admit. It might be something he did or something he failed to do. Either way, the silence is his way of delaying a reckoning he knows is inevitable. Deep down, he may even hope that if he says nothing long enough, the storm will pass, the questions will die down, and you'll let go of the truth you deserve. But this kind of silence is more than avoidance. It's a form of emotional evasion. He's not just avoiding a difficult conversation with you, he's avoiding accountability. And the danger here is that if you're someone who always gives the benefit of the doubt, you'll start filling in the gaps with hope. You'll think maybe he's just overwhelmed, or he's probably dealing with something he doesn't know how to express. And while that might be true, it doesn't change the fact that he's choosing to keep you in the dark. He's choosing guilt over growth, silence over sincerity. And here's what no one tells you. When someone feels real guilt and wants to make it right, they step up. They initiate the hard conversation. They say, "I messed up," even when it's uncomfortable. Real men take responsibility not because it's easy, but because it's the only way forward. But when someone's guilt outweighs their integrity, they go quiet. They think that by not speaking it, they don't have to own it. And that silence becomes the space where trust erodes, where connection frays, and where love starts to feel like confusion. You deserve a man who is emotionally brave, one who doesn't go silent when things get messy, one who doesn't leave you wondering if you did something wrong when he's the one holding the truth hostage. You deserve a man who respects you enough to say the hard thing instead of hiding behind vague words and disappearing acts. A man who knows that guilt unspoken becomes a prison, not just for him, but for you too. And if he stays silent, if he continues to let guilt fester while you carry the weight of his unspoken actions, then you have to understand one powerful truth. His silence is not your responsibility to decode. It's not your job to pry open a closed heart. Your worth isn't dependent on how well you can pull words out of someone who refuses to be honest. When a man goes quiet because he's guilty, let him sit with it. Let him feel the echo of your absence. Because the kind of woman who walks away from a man who can't face her with truth is the kind of woman who refuses to be a casualty of someone else's cowardice. Guilt may be his burden, but freedom is yours. And that freedom begins the moment you stop accepting silence as a substitute for respect. If there's one truth I want you to carry from all of this, it's that silence speaks volumes. When a man goes quiet, it's not always because he has nothing to say. It's often because he can't say what matters most. Maybe it's fear, maybe it's confusion, maybe it's guilt. But whatever it is, remember that your job isn't to become a translator for someone else's emotional silence. It's to protect your peace, honor your clarity, and demand the kind of connection that doesn't rely on guesswork. You are not here to chase meaning in someone else's silence. You are not here to shrink your standards for the comfort of someone who refuses to grow. If he's quiet, let him be. But don't let his silence control your voice. Don't let it keep you stuck in waiting rooms of false hope. You are allowed to want communication, consistency, and courage. And you are allowed to walk away from anyone who can't give you that. Because at the end of the day, a real connection isn't built in silence. It's built in truth. And the right man, the man who's worth your time, won't go quiet when it matters most. He'll show up, speak up, and hold your heart with the same care you give to his. Until then, keep choosing you. That's the loudest, most powerful move you can ever make.